It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when Gregory Walker, a man who had once been the picture of success, made a decision that would unravel everything he had ever built. Standing in the doorway of his luxurious home, he looked over his shoulder at Margaret, his wife of nearly 30 years. She was sitting on the couch, a book in her hands, her eyes flicking up only briefly as he stood there, his bags packed. "I'm leaving, Margaret," Gregory said, his voice flat, devoid of the emotion it should have carried. Margaret blinked, a strange silence filling the room. She lowered her book slowly, her face a mask of confusion. "Leaving? For where?" Gregory avoided her gaze, his mind already far from the home they had shared for so long. "I'm leaving for her," he said simply, his words cutting through the still air like a knife. Margaret's heart dropped. Her breath caught in her chest. "Her?" "Yes," he said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "My life with you, it's over. I'm going to start something new. With someone who makes me feel alive." The silence between them stretched longer than it ever had in all their years together. Margaret's eyes welled with tears, but she remained still, her lips trembling slightly. I never saw this coming," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Gregory didn't respond. He turned his back to her, walking toward the door without another glance. Behind him, Margaret stood frozen, as though the weight of his departure had taken root in her very soul. What had gone wrong? Where had the man she married gone? All she could do was stand there, motionless, as the sound of the door clicking shut echoed in her mind. Weeks passed, and life in the grand, empty house continued, but it was no longer the same. Margaret clung to the memories of their once happy life, struggling to understand how everything had slipped away so quickly. But Gregory? He was far from her thoughts, entangled in the whirlwind of a new life. The mistress, a woman named Lisa, young, beautiful, and full of promises, had swept Gregory off his feet with the very things that Margaret had long since stopped giving him: excitement, adventure, and unbridled passion. Gregory, intoxicated by the allure of something different, had turned his back on the life he'd once cherished, forgetting the value of what he already had. Lisa was everything Margaret was not. She was carefree, spontaneous, and alluring in ways Margaret, with her quiet grace, could never hope to be. Gregory, though, didn't see it for what it was. He saw only the promise of youth and an escape from the familiarity of his years with his wife. But it didn't take long for cracks to form in his new paradise. Lisa's jealousy began to show, her temper flaring at even the smallest things. Her words became sharper, her expectations higher. Soon, Gregory found himself second-guessing his choice, his perfect new world beginning to feel more like a prison. And then, just when he thought things couldn't get worse, he received a call that would change everything. "Gregory, we need to talk," Lisa's voice was tight over the phone. "I don't know how to say this, but I'm pregnant." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Pregnant? How could this be? They had barely known each other for more than a few months. He had never imagined something like this would happen. But it had. "Gregory?" Lisa's voice wavered with uncertainty. "Are you there?" He stared at the phone in his hand, unable to speak. His thoughts raced, spinning in a whirlwind of disbelief and guilt. Margaret. The life he left behind. The family he had torn apart for a fleeting desire for something new. What had seemed like the answer to his problems now seemed like the beginning of a much larger storm. He wasn't sure what to do. He wasn't sure if he even wanted this life anymore, but one thing was clear: the life he had with Margaret, that steady foundation he had once taken for granted, was gone forever. And then, just as Gregory's world seemed to crumble around him, he received an unexpected visitor at his door. The doorbell rang late one evening, the sound cutting through the quiet of his new life. When he opened it, there stood Margaret. But she wasn't the same woman he had left behind. She looked different, stronger, more confident. She wasn't crying or pleading for him to come back. No, Margaret had changed. And what she said next would change everything. "Gregory, we need to talk," Margaret said, her voice calm but steady. "You've made your choice, but I've made mine too." Gregory's stomach twisted. Could this be the beginning of his biggest regret? This was just the beginning. Gregory had no idea the storm he had created, and he didn't yet realize that the choices he had made would force him to confront the very truth he had been running from all along. Margaret's return marked the start of a series of events that would shake his world to its very core. And in the end, Gregory would be left to answer a question he hadn't considered: was it all worth it? As the days passed, Gregory found himself increasingly unsettled by the situation he had created. The passion he once believed would be the solution to all his problems was now a burden, and Lisa's once charming allure began to fray at the edges. What had felt like the start of an exciting new life now felt more like a cage: her jealousy, her constant demands, her manipulative behavior, it was all slowly sinking in. Lisa had always been full of promises of adventure and excitement, of a life where he could escape the monotony of his marriage. But what he hadn't expected was her deep insecurity, her fear of being abandoned, and the constant need to keep him tethered to her. Her outbursts were becoming more frequent, her expectations growing higher with each passing day. Gregory was beginning to feel trapped, suffocated by a love that felt like it had turned into something more possessive than passionate. He had thought leaving his wife would bring him peace, but instead, it brought him turmoil. He longed for the calm, steady comfort Margaret had once provided, but he was too proud to admit it. One evening, after another argument about something small, something meaningless, Lisa exploded. "You think I don't see it, don't you? You still love her. You never stopped loving her. I'm just your second choice." Lisa shouted, her eyes filled with tears of anger and frustration. Gregory stared at her, stunned. He hadn't said anything like that, he hadn't even thought it. But now that she mentioned it, a sinking feeling gnawed at his chest. Was she right? Was he trying to replace something with her that could never be replaced? "I'm not your backup, Gregory. I'm everything you need, but you can't even see it. You never let go of her. You'll never let go of her," Lisa continued, her voice trembling with emotion. "I gave up everything for you. I left my life, my family, everything for you. And you still—" "Stop!" Gregory interrupted, his voice harsh. "I never said you were my backup. But I can't do this anymore. I need some space. I need time to think." The moment those words left his mouth, he saw the shift in her face. It wasn't just sadness, it was something darker, something that made Gregory's stomach tighten. He had seen her in many moods, but this was different. This was something she hadn't shown before. Lisa's eyes narrowed. "You want space? Fine. But don't forget, Gregory, everyone has their breaking point. And when I break, there will be no going back." Gregory stood there, frozen. He wasn't sure if her words were a threat or a promise, but he knew one thing: things had gone too far, and he didn't know how to undo what had been done. The next morning, as Gregory sat at the kitchen table sipping his coffee, his phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. His heart skipped as he read the message. "Gregory, you're not the only one with secrets. I know things you wouldn't believe. Things about Margaret." The message sent a chill down his spine. Margaret? What could this possibly mean? Before he could process it further, his phone buzzed again. Another message. "I'll be waiting. It's time you learned the truth." Gregory's hands trembled as he stared at the screen. He had no idea who this was or what they meant by the truth, but a sense of dread washed over him. Could it be someone from his past? Or worse, was it Lisa trying to pull him deeper into this web of chaos? He immediately called Margaret, needing to hear her voice, needing to understand what was going on. But there was no answer. She wasn't picking up. Gregory felt a sense of panic rising within him. His world, which had already been turned upside down, was now spiraling into something darker. And the worst part? He didn't know who to trust anymore. Later that afternoon, he met Lisa at a small cafe, the tension between them palpable. She was sitting at a corner table, her eyes scanning the room, clearly agitated. "Did you send that message?" Gregory asked, his voice tight with suspicion. Lisa's face remained unreadable for a moment, then she let out a long, drawn-out sigh. "You think I sent it? What if I told you I didn't? What if someone else knows more than you think?" Gregory felt the weight of her words. Who else could be involved in this? What else had he missed? She leaned forward, her voice lowering to a whisper. "Gregory, you have no idea what you're really dealing with. There are things about Margaret that you don't know. Things she's kept hidden. You think she's just some quiet, broken woman waiting for you to come back, don't you? But she's not. She's got her own secrets." Gregory's mind reeled. He had always thought of Margaret as the steady, reliable one, the woman who had always supported him. But now, as Lisa's words sank in, doubt began to creep in. What had he really left behind? Who was Margaret, really? Lisa's warning hung in the air as Gregory tried to make sense of everything. His past and present were colliding in a way that felt both suffocating and disorienting. Was Lisa telling the truth? Had Margaret truly been hiding something all along? Or was this just another attempt to manipulate him, to make him question everything he had once believed? And then, the phone call came. It was Margaret. Gregory's heart skipped a beat as he answered, but before he could say a word, Margaret spoke, her voice steady but filled with an edge of urgency. "You need to come home, Gregory. Now. There's something I need to tell you. And you won't believe it when you hear it." The tension was unbearable. As Gregory hung up the phone, his mind raced. Whatever Margaret had to say, he knew it was going to change everything. And he had no idea just how much. Gregory couldn't shake the feeling of dread that settled over him as he made his way back to the house. Lisa's words still echoed in his mind, and the strange message he had received only added to the confusion. Who could possibly know secrets about Margaret? The woman he had left behind seemed so open, so vulnerable. But now, doubts crept in, twisting his thoughts. The car ride felt longer than it should have. Every red light seemed to last an eternity, and by the time Gregory pulled up to the driveway, he was a man on the edge, unsure of what awaited him inside. He had imagined this moment countless times, coming back to a life he had once discarded, hoping to find answers. But he hadn't expected this. When Gregory stepped out of the car, he was met with an eerie silence. The house, which once felt like a place of warmth and love, now seemed cold and distant, as if it had been holding its breath, waiting for him to return. He hesitated for a moment, before finally walking to the front door. He could hear faint movement inside. Margaret opened the door, but she wasn't the woman he remembered. Gone was the fragile, grieving wife he had left behind. Standing before him was a woman who seemed stronger, more composed. Her posture was straight, her eyes focused, no longer clouded by the sorrow he had once seen there. "Gregory," she said, her voice steady. "Come in. We need to talk." He swallowed hard, unsure of what to expect. I don't understand, Margaret. What's going on?" Margaret didn't immediately answer. Instead, she stepped aside, allowing him to enter. The moment Gregory crossed the threshold, he noticed something strange. The house felt different. The usual clutter that had filled the rooms, the photographs of their family, their life together, everything seemed to have been removed or replaced. "Where's everything?" Gregory asked, his voice thick with confusion. "What happened to our things?" Margaret paused, her eyes softening for a moment, but only for a second. "Everything had to change, Gregory. I had to change. And so did you. Gregory's heart raced. What do you mean? I don't know what's going on here. Margaret's gaze met his, unwavering. I've been doing a lot of thinking while you've been gone. And I realized something, there's no point in looking back. The past is gone, and it's time we both face what's coming next. Before Gregory could speak, she motioned for him to sit at the kitchen table. She sat across from him, folding her hands neatly in front of her, her expression unreadable. Gregory, I know about Lisa, she said, her voice calm, but there was something behind her words, something Gregory couldn't quite place. I know everything. And I think you owe me an explanation. Gregory felt his chest tighten. How could she know about Lisa? He hadn't told anyone about his new life, he hadn't even told his closest friends. How could Margaret possibly know? I don't understand, he stammered. How do you know? Margaret looked at him, almost pityingly. You're not the only one with connections, Gregory. I've had people watching you, too. People you never even thought to consider. And I've learned some things about you, and about her, that you wouldn't believe. Gregory felt a wave of disbelief wash over him. This was beyond anything he had imagined. The woman who had once seemed so innocent and trusting was now telling him she had been keeping tabs on him. What had happened to their marriage? Where had this strength come from? Margaret, you can't be serious. What are you talking about? His voice was shaking now, a mixture of guilt and confusion welling up inside him. She sighed, leaning forward. I'm not here to punish you, Gregory. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to tell you the truth. And you need to hear it. At that moment, Margaret reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope. She slid it across the table to him. Gregory's hands trembled as he picked it up, staring at the name on the front. It was his full name, written in bold, clear letters. He opened the envelope slowly, pulling out a series of photographs and documents. These are from the last few months, Margaret said, her voice calm. They're from the people I've been working with. They've been tracking Lisa, and they've uncovered things that you never even knew about her. I know you think you found happiness, Gregory, but you're not seeing the whole picture. She's been lying to you, manipulating you from the start. Gregory felt his stomach churn as he looked at the photographs, pictures of Lisa, her interactions with various people. There were meetings he hadn't known about, conversations he hadn't heard. It all pointed to one thing, Lisa's involvement in something far deeper and darker than Gregory had ever imagined. No. He whispered, feeling the weight of everything he had believed begin to crack. What is this? What's going on? Margaret leaned back, her eyes never leaving his. Lisa's been working with people who are using you, Gregory. They've been using your wealth, your name, to further their own agenda. And you've been a pawn in their game. Gregory's mind reeled. The woman he had abandoned his family for, the one he thought was his escape, was far from the innocent lover he had imagined. Lisa had been playing him all along. Why didn't you tell me this before? Gregory asked, his voice hoarse. Why did you keep this from me? Margaret's expression softened, but only slightly. Because, Gregory, I needed you to see it for yourself. I needed you to come to terms with what you've done, with who you've become. And I needed you to understand that not everything is what it seems. Gregory sat in stunned silence, the gravity of Margaret's words slowly sinking in. The woman he had left behind, the life he had discarded, was suddenly so much more complex than he could have ever imagined. Gregory, Margaret said quietly, breaking the silence. It's time for you to make a choice. You can continue down this path, but know that it will lead you somewhere you can't come back from. Or you can start over. Start fresh, with the truth. Gregory didn't know what to say. He didn't know what to do. His life had never been this complicated, and he wasn't sure he could handle it. But one thing was certain, everything he thought he knew was a lie. And that was only the beginning. Gregory's mind raced as he sat across from Margaret, the weight of her words bearing down on him. The photographs in his hand were like a dagger to his chest. He had never expected this. He thought Lisa was his escape, his fresh start. But now, he saw the truth, the web of lies and manipulation that she had spun around him, using his wealth and influence for her own gain. Margaret's calm demeanor made Gregory feel like a fool. All this time, she had known what was going on, and he hadn't seen a single clue. Her warning didn't feel like an accusation. It was more like a quiet plea, a subtle reminder that the choices he had made were not just hurting him but everyone around him. Margaret's voice broke the silence. "I know you're shocked, Gregory. But there's more you need to understand. You've only seen part of the picture." Gregory looked at her, his voice barely a whisper. "What do you mean? How could there be more?" Margaret's eyes darkened, her expression hardening. "Lisa isn't the only one who's been hiding something from you. There's a bigger game at play, and you've been too blind to see it. It's about control, Gregory. It's about power. And you've been a pawn in it all along." Gregory felt a cold chill run down his spine. What was she talking about? He couldn't wrap his mind around the idea that his entire life, everything he had worked for, was part of someone else's plan. He had always been in control, hadn't he? He had built his wealth, his status, his life. But now it seemed like all of it had been a lie. "Who else is involved?" he asked, his voice shaky with a mixture of fear and disbelief. Margaret hesitated for a moment, and then she spoke in a low, almost reluctant tone. "There's a man. Someone who has been watching you, pulling the strings behind the scenes. A man who has been working with Lisa, using her to get to you. His name is Martin Cole. He's the one who's been orchestrating everything." "Martin Cole?" Gregory repeated, the name unfamiliar. "Who is he?" Margaret's eyes narrowed. "He's a businessman. A powerful one. And he's been using people like you to further his own interests. You're not the first man he's manipulated, Gregory. You're just the latest." Gregory's mind was reeling. All these years, he had thought he was in control of his destiny, that every decision he made was his own. But now, he felt like a puppet, and someone else had been pulling the strings. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Gregory asked, his voice cracking with emotion. "Why didn't you warn me?" Margaret looked down for a moment, her fingers tracing the edge of the table. "I couldn't, Gregory. You had to see it for yourself. You had to understand that not everything is as it seems. I knew that if I told you, you wouldn't believe me. You had to realize that your choices have consequences." Gregory sat back in his chair, his mind spinning. How had it come to this? He had always thought of himself as a man who could make his own fate, who could control his own destiny. But now, it felt like his life was nothing more than a series of moves in a game he never signed up to play. Margaret continued, her voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity. "Martin Cole has been watching you for years, Gregory. He saw you as a means to an end. He used Lisa to get close to you. And now he's made his move. He's taken everything you've worked for, and if you don't stop him, he'll take even more." Gregory's hands clenched into fists, his anger rising. How could he have been so blind? How could he have trusted Lisa, trusted anyone, when the truth was staring him in the face? He had built his empire, but he hadn't realized how easily it could all be taken away. "You're saying I've lost everything?" Gregory asked, his voice hoarse. "That I've been used?" Margaret's gaze softened, but there was a sadness in her eyes. "Not everything, Gregory. But you've lost your way. You've let people in who don't have your best interests at heart. And now, you have to face the consequences of that. You need to take back control, before it's too late." Gregory felt the weight of her words settle over him. She was right. He had lost control, not just of his business, but of his life. He had let his ego and his desire for something new cloud his judgment. He had left behind the one person who had truly cared about him. And now, everything was falling apart. But it wasn't too late. Margaret was here, offering him a chance to make things right. She wasn't asking for him to beg for her forgiveness. She was offering him the opportunity to reclaim his life, to fix the mistakes he had made. Gregory took a deep breath, his anger slowly turning into determination. What do I need to do? Margaret smiled, a small but knowing smile. It's simple, really. You need to confront Martin Cole. Expose him for who he truly is. You need to take back what's yours, Gregory. And you need to do it before Lisa becomes the pawn he uses to destroy you completely. Gregory nodded, his resolve hardening. He knew this wouldn't be easy. But he had to do it. For his future, for his family, and for himself. As Gregory left the house that evening, the world around him felt different. The weight of the past few weeks hung heavy on his shoulders, but now there was a new sense of clarity. He wasn't just fighting for his life back, he was fighting for his dignity. He had lost so much, but he wasn't going to lose it all. Not to Martin Cole, and certainly not to Lisa. The road ahead was uncertain, but Gregory was ready to face it head-on. He would no longer be a pawn in someone else's game. He was going to take control of his fate, and he wasn't going to let anyone, not even his own mistakes, stand in his way. Gregory spent the following days in a whirlwind of preparation. The truth about Martin Cole had shaken him to his core, and now, he was left with no choice but to confront the man who had been manipulating him from the shadows. The power that Cole had over his life was undeniable, and Gregory understood that if he didn't act swiftly, everything he had worked for, the wealth, the business, his reputation, could all vanish in an instant. But there was something else, something he hadn't anticipated. The deeper he dug into Cole's web, the more tangled it became. Gregory wasn't just up against a businessman who wanted to exploit him, he was facing a ruthless individual who had connections in places Gregory had never imagined. The first step, as Margaret had told him, was to confront Lisa. She was the key to understanding how deep this went. Gregory wasn't sure whether she had known about Cole's manipulation from the start or if she was just another pawn in his game, but he knew that the truth about her could change everything. As he sat in his office, staring out of the window, Gregory felt a sharp pang of guilt. He had left his wife for Lisa, he had thrown away the life he had known for a new beginning, only to find that it had all been a lie. And now, he had to face the consequences of his choices. His phone rang, breaking his thoughts. He glanced at the screen. It was Lisa. He took a deep breath and answered. Gregory, her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that he hadn't heard before. I know what you've been doing. I know you've been digging into Martin. You need to stop. You don't know what you're getting yourself into. Gregory's pulse quickened. I'm not stopping, Lisa. I know the truth now. You've been using me. You've been working with him, working with Cole to destroy me. There was a silence on the other end, followed by a soft chuckle. Oh, Gregory. You think you know everything, don't you? You don't even understand who you're dealing with. Martin Cole isn't just some businessman. He's someone who controls things. Powerful things. People you've never even heard of. You can't just walk away from him. You'll never escape him. Gregory's anger flared. I don't need to escape him. I need to stop him. I'm going to expose everything, Lisa. And I'm starting with you. Lisa laughed again, but this time, it was cold and empty. You can't expose me, Gregory. You don't know what I've done. What I've had to do to survive in this world. And you don't know what will happen if you push me too far. You're already too deep, and you won't get out alive. Her words hit him like a punch. Gregory realized that Lisa wasn't just a lover, a woman he had fallen for, she was a piece of this dark, twisted puzzle, one that had been set in motion long before he had even met her. "I'm done with you," Gregory said, his voice firm. "I'm done with all of this. You and Cole can't control me anymore." There was a pause, and then Lisa's voice softened, almost eerily calm. "You think you have a choice, don't you? But you don't, Gregory. You never did." Gregory slammed the phone down, his heart racing. He had made his decision. There was no turning back now. That evening, Gregory found himself in a dark, quiet corner of a restaurant, waiting for the man he had to confront. Martin Cole. The man who had been pulling the strings, the man who had been behind everything. Gregory had gathered enough information to know that confronting him was dangerous, but it was also the only way forward. He couldn't allow his life to be destroyed any longer. The door to the private dining room opened, and a tall, imposing figure stepped inside. Martin Cole. Gregory stood to face him, feeling the weight of the moment. Martin's sharp eyes studied him, sizing him up, and for a brief second, Gregory felt a flicker of doubt. Was this man truly the mastermind behind everything that had happened? Could he be stopped? Martin's lips curled into a small smile as he took a seat across from Gregory. "Gregory Walker," he said, his voice smooth and confident. "You're looking well. I didn't expect to see you here, but I must admit, I'm intrigued. What's this all about?" Gregory's hands were trembling, but he steadied himself. "I know what you've been doing, Martin. I know you've been using me to further your own agenda. I know about Lisa, about the lies, about everything. It ends now." Martin's smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. "You think you're in control of this situation, Gregory? You're not. You never were." Gregory leaned forward, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "I'm not here to negotiate, Martin. I'm here to stop you. I'm going to expose everything you've been doing, everything you've been hiding. And I'll make sure you can't hurt anyone else." Martin chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You still don't get it, do you? You think you can just waltz in here and stop me? I have connections, Gregory. People who will do anything to protect me. Do you really think you're in a position to make threats?" Gregory clenched his fists, fighting back the fear that threatened to overtake him. He had made his choice. He had to see it through. "You're going to fall, Martin." "I'll make sure of it," Gregory said, his voice low and dangerous. For a moment, there was silence between them. And then, Martin leaned back in his chair, a glint of amusement in his eyes. "We'll see about that, won't we?" Gregory left the restaurant with a newfound sense of determination. He knew the road ahead would be treacherous, but there was no turning back. He had made his choice, and now, he had to live with it. Martin Cole may have thought he was untouchable, but Gregory was ready to fight. And he would fight with everything he had. Gregory stood at the edge of everything he had built, looking out over the city skyline from his office window. The weight of the choices he had made over the past few weeks seemed to bear down on him, but there was something else, something new. A sense of clarity. The confrontation with Martin Cole had been a turning point. The man had tried to intimidate him, to make him feel small, but Gregory hadn't backed down. No, he had stood his ground, and he could feel the shift inside him. He had done what he needed to do. The truth was out there now. The lies were exposed. But the consequences of those choices were still unfolding. What Martin had said haunted him, though. "You think you're in control of this situation? You never were." For so long, Gregory had believed he was the master of his own fate. He had convinced himself that he could control everything, his marriage, his business, his life. But now, he knew better. He had been a pawn, manipulated by forces greater than himself, by his own arrogance and by people who wanted to use him. And yet, through it all, there had been one constant: Margaret. The woman who had once been cast aside in favor of something new, something exciting. The woman he had left behind. She had never left him, though. She had never given up on him. Now, as the dust settled, Gregory knew that he needed to make things right, not just for himself, but for her. Margaret had been the one person who had always been there for him, the one person who had never wavered. And despite everything, she was still waiting for him. Not to forgive him, but to give him a chance to be the man she had always believed he could be. That afternoon, Gregory found himself standing outside Margaret's house. The world had changed in ways he hadn't anticipated, but one thing remained clear: he needed to face her. The confrontation with Lisa and Martin was over. The storm had passed. But now it was time to rebuild. Margaret opened the door when he knocked, her eyes searching his face as though trying to gauge his intentions. She had no idea what was about to come, but Gregory knew he had to speak the truth. He couldn't hide behind his pride any longer. "I've made a mess of everything, Margaret," Gregory said, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought I had everything figured out. I thought I was in control, but I was wrong. I hurt you in ways I can never undo, and I don't know if you can ever forgive me for that." Margaret remained quiet for a moment, her gaze unwavering. Then, she spoke softly, but firmly. "Gregory, I've already forgiven you. I had to. For me. But you have to understand something: you're not the man I need you to be just because you say you are. You have to show it. I'm not asking for a perfect person. I'm asking for someone who's willing to face the consequences of his actions and grow from them. You've got to make a choice, Gregory. And this time, it's not just about you." Her words hit him like a tidal wave. They were raw, honest, and they cut deep. He had always thought that he could fix everything with money, with power, but now he realized that it was never about that. It had always been about something more important: integrity, love, and the people who truly mattered. Gregory took a deep breath, his hands trembling as he spoke. "I'm ready, Margaret. I'm ready to be the man you've always believed I could be. I can't change what I've done, but I can change what comes next." Margaret nodded slowly, her expression softening. "It's not going to be easy, Gregory. There's a lot of work to be done. But if you're serious, if you're truly ready, then we can start over." A wave of relief washed over Gregory, but it wasn't just about the relief. It was about the realization that the life he had thought he wanted, the fast life, the excitement, the escape, had never been what mattered. It had been the stability, the loyalty, and the strength of his marriage that had always kept him grounded. And now, as he stood in front of Margaret, he knew that he could rebuild. But it wasn't just about them. It was about learning to trust again, to rebuild the foundation of their life, and to make amends for the mistakes he had made. The next few months were a blur. There was no quick fix, no magic solution to the damage that had been done. Gregory spent hours in meetings, working to regain control of his company, to repair the relationships he had nearly destroyed. He reached out to his employees, to his clients, and he faced the consequences of his choices head-on. But through it all, Margaret stood by his side. She didn't ask for anything in return. She didn't demand an apology every day or make him feel guilty. She simply supported him, believing that he could change, that he could be better. One day, as Gregory sat in his office, a realization washed over him. The business wasn't what mattered anymore. The power, the wealth, none of it was important. What mattered was the people in his life. The love he had taken for granted. The loyalty of someone like Margaret, who had believed in him when he hadn't believed in himself. And with that realization, Gregory made a vow, not just to Margaret, but to himself. He would be a better man, not for the world, but for the woman who had always believed in him. In the end, the road wasn't easy. The consequences of Gregory's actions would stay with him for the rest of his life, but through it all, he had learned a powerful lesson. True success wasn't found in wealth or power, it was found in love, in trust, and in the courage to face the truth. Gregory's journey wasn't over. But he knew, for the first time in a long time, that he was on the right path. This conclusion brings everything full circle, with Gregory facing the consequences of his actions and making the choice to rebuild his life. It's a story of redemption, learning from mistakes, and understanding the value of love and loyalty. The life lesson here is about personal growth, responsibility, and the realization that true happiness doesn't come from material wealth, it comes from the relationships we nurture and the choices we make.